At this very moment, Russia is the most sanctioned country in the world. A lot of international brands are leaving the country, the flights are not happening in and out of the country, and just overall, let's call it like this, the airspace above Russia is not that much friendly. Russia unfortunately becomes more and more isolated from the rest of the world, but the government of Russia makes it look like we don't need anyone, we're self-sufficient. Are these the signs of Russia getting back into the USSR? And this is exactly the question many people around the world have right now inside their minds, including you, since you started watching this video. What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. And today I want to share with you some of my thoughts whether Russia will lower the Iron Curtain once again. So, whenever most people are asked about the Soviet Union, they have this picture inside their heads, which is like empty shelves, limited selections, everyone looks the same, everyone shares the same goals, and people are just too busy with their everyday lives, so they have no time to even think outside of the box. Which is, by the way, was never encouraged by the state. It continued happening all the way until that moment when the people of the Soviet Union finally started traveling abroad and bringing back stories of how people in the West live and just how many different ways of building your life there are. And inevitably, this vision ended up in the minds of the Soviet government officials, which, long story short, ended up with the world-famous perestroika, initiated by Mikhail Gorbachev. And it basically means moving away from the communism and adopting the ideas of democracy, freedom, capitalism, and decentralization. But before that, the government tried to control every aspect of a human life. Just think about this one boss who is constantly micromanaging his employees. And I'm pretty sure you have one in your mind right now. And so, instead of taking care of problems that actually matter, this person spends half of his or her afternoon deciding the appropriate time for lunch and in which groups the employees must departure to eat, so there's like no overlap. Besides being extremely annoying and ineffective, to say the least, such management will never work in the long-term perspective, especially if you are in charge of a country which spreads across pretty much entire half of the world. You simply can never fully control every single person. And inevitably, the Western ideologies started leaking into the minds of the Soviet people, including the authorities. And by the way, if you like such special episodes in addition to my daily news reporting, feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel. So, perestroika. It encouraged the people of the USSR to be different and work together, both in direct and in indirect meaning of this word. And not just with your friends, relatives or neighbors, but also with the people from the different countries. Perestroika attempted to rebuild the economy and encourage small businesses to be self-sufficient by promoting the entrepreneurship and showing the support from the government. But most importantly, perestroika was also able to lift this Iron Curtain, which was literally hiding the USSR from the rest of the world. Soviet people made significant progress since 1990s. They started traveling, speaking with people from other countries, experiencing different cultures, and just in general, seeing how many different ways of living your life there are. This has also been reflected in the freedom of choice, which is basically which food you want to eat, which clothes you want to wear, and which car you want to drive. And so, I guess you already know it, people get used to good things very quick. So that's why whenever you try to take it away from them, it creates a very big resistance. What I basically mean is that it will be so much harder for the current government of Russia to bring its own people inside their own small world. And in order to achieve this, the Russian authorities have to answer three main questions. The first one is how they can unite the people. The second is how to show the people that the country and the regime is everything they will ever need. And the third is how to make people, at least subconsciously, resist and reject the other, especially the Western way of living. So, starting with the first question, how to unite people. And traditionally, this has been solved by creating an external enemy, usually the artificial one. And to be honest, Russia has been doing this for the past decade. People have been constantly shown on TV, for example, how greedy and evil Americans are, how there are no traditional values in Europe, and most recently, obviously, the attention entirely switched to Ukraine. Brainwashing obviously takes time, and not every single Russian started hating the Western way of living immediately. For some it took just several weeks, while for others it took several years. But when you're exposed to 24/7 propaganda with the complete absence of other points of view, even the strongest minds eventually fall into this black hole of propaganda. And that is why whenever the government shows its people that there is some kind of an external enemy, the very first thing the authorities should also do is to make sure that people know that the government will be always there to protect them. Which in our case is the question number 2, how to show the people that the country and the regime is everything they will ever need. Just think about yourself during any of the conflict situations in the past, whether this is just something verbal or an actual fight. If there was this one person who took your side, subconsciously you thought that this was the greatest human being in the world, your best friend, or at least during the duration of this conflict. It is just in humans' nature that we will always look for friends and support, and we will always feel close and even indebted to those who saved us. And so the third question, the last thing the government should do in order to completely separate the country from the rest of the world, is to make people resist and reject the other ways of living. And it is achieved by once again showing the worst from the rest of the world and showing how good and perfect everything is back at home. Which in some way is just the repetition of the first 2 steps. Which is just once again as a reminder, the first step is to show that there is an external enemy, and the second is to make sure that people know that the government will always protect them. And unfortunately, this is exactly what the government of Russia has been doing for the last at least decade. I still remember the time when you could have just told your friends or relatives that you just traveled across America and not feel like you're being judged by them. Sometimes you can even see the propagandistic questions lighting up in their eyes, just waiting for the perfect moment to be asked. Such as, how are these Yankees doing? Is there really so much poverty and people sleep on the streets? Are they really so fat? How often do they shoot each other on the streets? And do they really steal the Russian kids? I even have some friends who used to be against the current Russian authorities, participated in the opposition protests back in 2011, praised Navalny, but even them right now, they despise everything non-Russian. And as you might have guessed, these people are no longer interested in anything that happens outside of Russia. They will not care much if, for example, the groceries will only be available from the Russian farmers, even though it means the reduction in the selection by 90% and the prices will go up significantly, because there will be literally no competition. They will also not care about selecting between 2 completely identical Ladas, because what if these Western cars, they have GPS systems to track me? And they will definitely not care about going abroad, at least as a tourist, because, Russia is so big, there is so much to see here, why do I even need to leave the country? All this means that the government fully and successfully converted them, and these people will not oppose much if the Iron Curtain lowers once again. Because they think, or at least the government made them think, that they're the nation of free, independent and self-sufficient people. And because of this, it will be just so much easier for the Russian government in the future to isolate the country. Because it's not that complicated to rule the country when there are not that many different opinions, everyone supports everything you do, and just in general, being different is wrong. And so, as a result, this creates a nation where every single action by its people is controlled by the government. Some of you might not know it, but there are actually prohibited books in Russia, and there's even a ministry which decides which websites to block. All this leaves the people of Russia with very few places where they can read, see or hear different opinions. And that is why whenever you see another video of these crazy Russian Z patriots, you'll most likely immediately dislike them. I mean, who in the right mind will behave like this? But these Russians, they simply don't know better. They are only presented with one side of the truth. They can't even choose what to believe in, because the government already decided for them the one and only approved truth. So, does this all mean that Russia is going back into the USSR times? And well, unfortunately, it does look like it. For the last decade, Russia has been doing import substitutions, and at least for now, it potentially can be a self-sufficient country, at least in the near future. And the unity among the people is relatively strong right now. That is why if the government decides to close the borders, most won't even oppose this. They'll be unhappy for sure, but they will most likely not do anything about it. The actual Iron Curtain, or at least the one as bad as during the Soviet times, might not be lowered. But the government of Russia will do everything it can to turn Russia into this resentful kid, sitting in his own corner, playing with his own toys, and not interacting with any other kids in the kindergarten. Thank you so much for your attention, товарищи, and see you tomorrow.